A gun trembled in a stranger's hand, aimed at my wife's face, all because she jogged past the HOA clubhouse without ID. What he didn't know. She's an active Delta Force operative who disarms terrorists for a living. 2 days off a classified mission, still in field gear, she faced this cop holding his Glock sideways. She could have ended him with a pine cone, but she gave him a choice. He chose wrong. We moved here for peace. But quiet died the moment that Glock clicked. We wanted a basement with good fiber internet. We found this HOA neighborhood tucked outside the city, marketed as a private, secure, family-focused community. They had glossy brochures and words like sanctuary, community spirit, and optional monthly events. Nowhere did it mention armed cosplay enthusiasts patrolling the sidewalks like it was a Call of Duty map. We should have known something was off when we saw the golf carts, 4 of them lined up outside the clubhouse, each one painted matte black with white block letters. HSD, the Home Safety Division. They looked like budget SWAT units, if units had cup holders and garden gnome decals. One of them even had flashing blue lights zip-tied to the roof. I thought it was cute, thought maybe for HOA parties or Halloween. Nope. These people took it seriously, as in try to give you a ticket for walking your dog without a leash on your own property serious. We kept to ourselves for the first week. My wife, fresh off her deployment, spent most of her time organizing the garage and setting up perimeter cameras, habit, not paranoia. She always said it helped her transition. I spent my time in the home office, eyes glued to code, trying not to think about Karen Brewster, the HOA president, who introduced herself with a laminated badge and 3 clipboards. She had the smile of someone who had never been challenged and didn't plan to start now. She told us she was available 24/7 for community-related needs and then handed us a printed booklet of rules. I flipped it open and found gems like no drying laundry outdoors, grass may not exceed 2.75 inches, and my personal favorite, residents must not appear intimidating during recreational activity. Karen's eyes lingered on my wife's biceps. No intimidating appearances during recreation, she said, tapping the rule book, like she already knew she'd lost. When I asked what that meant, she smiled and said, "You know it when you see it." That's when I knew we were in trouble. But my wife? She smiled politely, nodded, and thanked Karen for the welcome packet, like she didn't just return from extracting foreign nationals under enemy fire. She's good at that, being calm, blending in. I've seen her walk into rooms full of tension and diffuse them with a single sentence. It started like any other day. She got up early, pulled on her hoodie, tied her shoes, and went out for her jog, just a quick loop around the neighborhood, she said. I made coffee and settled into my desk. About 10 minutes in, I got a motion alert from our street-facing camera. At first, I thought it was a delivery, but when I checked the feed, I saw 2 HOA golf carts parked diagonally across the street. And there she was, my wife, standing completely still, hands slightly raised. In front of her was a man, maybe 50, potbelly barely contained in a tactical vest, holding a pistol at chest level and shouting something I couldn't make out. I dropped my mug. By the time I sprinted outside, things had escalated. 2 more officers had shown up, standing behind the first guy like backup dancers, each one looking more confused than the last. And there she was, calm as ever, breathing slow, gaze locked on the gun. I stepped closer, ready to yell, but then I saw her right hand twitch, barely, just enough for me to know she was ready to take control if she had to. The guy was yelling about identification, about how she looked suspicious, about how she was running in the restricted HOA zone without a badge. I remember thinking, who the hell runs with a badge? My wife kept her voice low and steady, asking if he was law enforcement. He said, "We're HOA police." That's higher than city cops here. That was the moment I saw a tiny smirk tug at the corner of her mouth. She gave him one last chance. Why'd she give him a choice at all? Maybe because real warriors pick their battles, and Karen was already losing hers. "Sir," she said, "I'm going to ask you to lower your weapon for your own safety." He didn't. What happened next was so fast I couldn't even react. One blink, and the man's gun was on the ground. Next blink, and he was face first on the pavement, one arm pinned in a hold so precise it probably had a NATO name. She didn't even bruise him. Me? I stood there shaking, half terrified, half proud, watching a woman who'd stared down warlords treat this clown like a training exercise. She leaned in close and whispered something to him. I couldn't hear it, but whatever it was made his eyes go wide, like he'd seen a ghost. Police were called, of course. Two cruisers rolled in within 5 minutes. The fake cops started yelling about assault, about resisting HOA authority, about neighborhood safety. Then one of the real officers looked at my wife, paused, and nodded. He asked for ID. She showed him something. He read it, looked up at the HOA goons, and said, "Ma'am, you're good to go." And just like that, they left. No questions, warnings, nothing. The look on Karen Brewster's face when she arrived 10 minutes later and found her captain nursing a dislocated ego and a bruised reputation was something I'll treasure forever. That was the beginning because, instead of backing off, Karen declared war, not just on my wife, but on us both. She had no idea she was picking a fight with someone who could sneak into a war zone undetected, someone who didn't just play soldier on weekends, but train them. Karen thought she ran this neighborhood. My wife? She's taken entire villages back from enemy control, and this neighborhood? This wasn't even going to be the hardest thing she faced this month. The emergency HOA meeting was called for 7 p.m., and by 6:30, you would have thought it was the Super Bowl. Lawn chairs lined the sidewalk. People brought popcorn. A few neighbors even wheeled in coolers, muttering about how this was the show of the year. Karen Brewster, self-declared queen of the cul-de-sac, had summoned the entire neighborhood to the community center after a violent assault on a decorated HOA officer. The phrase alone was already the subject of memes in our local Facebook group, complete with Photoshop edits of the disarmed officer mid-face plant, now referred to as Captain Clipboard. Karen, meanwhile, had been pacing the clubhouse all afternoon like a dictator preparing for her address to the nation, wearing a khaki vest covered in HOA pins and what looked suspiciously like a Bluetooth headset meant for airport ground control. I didn't want to go. My wife was practically begging me not to, and because she was worried, I think just knew I'd say something sarcastic and get myself banned from the snack table. But after the absurdity of having a gun pulled on her for jogging, I couldn't resist. I wore my favorite t-shirt, the one that said, "My wife's other ride is a Black Hawk," and grabbed a notebook just to make them nervous. She stayed home, sipping tea on the porch, watching a live stream someone's teenager had set up with a GoPro. Honestly, she seemed entertained. The meeting started exactly 2 minutes late, which in HOA terms is basically anarchy. Karen stepped up to the podium with a dramatic sigh, like she was about to announce a national tragedy. Behind her, a whiteboard read "Emergency Response Strategy," and someone had drawn stick figures labeled "Threat Actor" and "Heroic Defense." The heroic was wearing sunglasses and had bigger biceps than the HOA officer ever had in real life. Karen adjusted her microphone 3 times before starting. "Neighbors," she said in the tone of someone running for a position no one asked to be filled, "it is with a heavy heart that I report a direct and violent assault on one of our peacekeepers." That's right, peacekeepers, not volunteers, not security enthusiasts, peacekeepers, like this was the UN. She pointed to a chair on the stage where the HOA captain sat with his arm in a sling and an expression that fell somewhere between humiliation and dairy-induced regret. "Captain Fredrickson," she said solemnly, "was injured in the line of duty protecting our streets from a trespasser with a known history of aggression." My hand shot up. "Yes," Karen said with a strange smile. "Quick question," I said. "What's the known history?" Because I live with her, and she's never even raised her voice to a neighbor. She does, however, raise chickens. So, unless that rooster's been throwing punches, I'm not sure where this history is stored. A few people laughed. Karen didn't. "Mr. Owens, we ask that you refrain from sarcastic commentary." "Got it," I said. "Just real commentary from now on. Like the part where your officer pulled a gun on a woman taking a jog." Karen flinched but recovered quickly. "It was a miscommunication." We have reason to believe the individual was casing homes for potential theft. She was wearing a Fitbit and listening to a true crime podcast. Exactly, Karen snapped, pouncing like she had found the smoking gun. Was listening to crime. That suggests intent. I just blinked at her, utterly speechless. Around the room, murmurs started to ripple. Even people who'd previously just wanted to avoid fines were now starting to question why their HOA fees were being used to fund fake tactical vests and golf cart sirens. Then came the body cam footage. See, what Karen didn't know was that one of the HOA officers had invested in a body camera, trying to emulate a real cop. He wore it to feel official. What he forgot was that it had Wi-Fi synced to the cloud, and someone, one of the kids in the neighborhood, bless him, hacked into the feed and uploaded the whole altercation to a shared drive. 5 different people brought laptops to the meeting. Second the footage began rolling, there was no going back. There she was, my wife, calmly jogging, earbuds in. The officer's cart screeched to a halt in front of her. He shouted something incoherent about trespassing. She paused, confused, pulled out an earbud. More shouting, then the gun came out. Audible gasps filled the room. Then, in less than 3 seconds, she had disarmed him and placed him on the ground. She didn't even bruise him, just a textbook hold. Safe, efficient, non-lethal. When the footage ended, the room was silent, not out of fear, but realization. Karen's narrative had collapsed like a cheap folding chair. Someone in the back muttered, "She should be running the HOA." Karen slammed her clipboard on the podium. Enough. That footage is unauthorized. It doesn't represent the full context. What context? Someone asked. That your guys are cosplaying as cops and pointing guns at residents? What context makes that okay? Karen tried to regain control, calling for order, but it was done. The curtain had been pulled back. People began asking questions, real questions. Where were their dues going? Why did they need an HOA police force? Who authorized weapons? What training had they received? The answers were vague, contradictory, and laced with bureaucratic nonsense. Later that night, as I walked home under the street lamps Karen insisted on dimming to reduce light pollution, I felt something shift in the air. Power she had rooted in fear, confusion, and paperwork had taken a major hit. People weren't just questioning her anymore. They were rallying. And for the first time since we moved in, I saw a neighbor wave without looking over his shoulder first. Back at home, my wife was sitting on the porch, boots up, sipping tea. "How is it?" she asked, not even glancing up. "Better than cable," I said. "You're famous now." "I saw," she replied with a small smile. "Someone made a gif of me disarming him. It has over 2,000 shares." We sat in silence for a moment, the crickets chirping louder than the HOA had ever allowed. Then I said what we were both thinking. "She's not going to back down, is she?" "Nope," my wife said, draining her cup. "She's going to escalate." And she did, with fines, with threats, new rules that didn't exist a week ago. But she had no idea she was writing checks her clipboard couldn't cash. And while Karen was busy crafting her next HOA decree, my wife was already preparing her next move. Not with weapons, not violence, but with intel, with networks, the same precision she used in the field. Because this wasn't just about our yard anymore. This was war, suburban, passive-aggressive, golf cart-laced war, and we were just getting started. The first envelope came 3 days later, certified mail, no return address, but we both knew exactly where it came from. My wife opened it without a word, scanned the letter, and handed it to me with the kind of look that said, "This is going to be fun." It was an official notice from the HOA, claiming that she was in violation of multiple community standards. Apparently, excessive aggression was now a finable offense, as was intimidating presence, failure to display neighborhood ID, and my personal favorite, running with hostile energy. The total? $1,470 in fines, due immediately. Non-payment would result in additional enforcement actions. My wife set the letter down and calmly reached for a pen. She flipped the paper over, jotted down a list of names and dates, and muttered, "She just escalated to the wrong level." Karen hadn't just declared war, she doubled down on her nonsense. The HOA had passed 6 new bylaws overnight, none of them voted on, none legally filed with the city. One of them required all residents to wear visible identification while walking in public spaces. Another gave the HOA security team the power to issue fines on site. Then came the kicker, a new clause stating that anyone who posed a threat to communal peace and harmony could be reported for expulsion from the neighborhood. Expulsion, like this was a private college and Karen the dean of delusion. The funny part was that Karen still believed she had the upper hand. She was used to dealing with residents who just grumbled quietly or moved away. What she didn't realize, she could not possibly comprehend, was that my wife had a long, documented history of dismantling operations 10 times more organized and 1,000 times more dangerous than this one. And she was very good at it. The retaliation started with a restraining order filed in the county court, full of ridiculous language accusing my wife of militant behavior, psychological warfare, and tactical manipulation. Karen submitted heavily edited footage to back up her claims, conveniently cutting out the moment where her captain pulled the weapon. Unfortunately for her, the court had already received the unedited footage from several concerned neighbors. The judge tossed the filings so fast it barely touched the desk. Still, Karen didn't stop. She sent more fines, letters, threats of legal action. HOA patrols started driving past our house every hour, sometimes parking nearby and pretending to take notes. One of them aimed a speed gun at our mailbox. Another crouched behind a bush with binoculars. These were grown adults with nothing better to do than harass a woman who could disable an entire surveillance network with her left thumb. That's when my wife made a call. It was a short conversation. I only heard her sigh, few, yes, sirs, a few nods, and then, thank you, I'll handle the rest. She hung up and turned to me. We're on the record now, she said. Let's see how deep the rabbit hole goes. The next day, we started digging into public records, property filings, and financial disclosures, all technically accessible to any homeowner, but rarely explored. What we found was both hilarious and horrifying. Turns out Karen's sanctuary was built on $180,000 of fake fountains and phantom gardens. My wife cross-referenced invoices with security footage. The only thing blooming? Fraud. The HOA had been funneling money through a landscaping company called Verdant Horizon LLC, a shell set up under the name of a board member's cousin, coincidentally, the same captain who pulled the gun. Over the past 3 years, the HOA had paid Verdant Horizon nearly $180,000 for beautification projects. According to the records, they had installed 8 fountains, repaved 3 roads, and landscaped over 30 public gardens. In reality, 2 fountains existed, none of the roads had been touched in years, and the public gardens were weeds growing behind the dumpster by the clubhouse. The HOA had ruled the neighborhood through silence and intimidation. She was about to flip that dynamic on its head. She started small flyers, not angry or accusatory, just clear bullet points, where the money went, where it didn't, which bylaws were never legally filed, and which members of the security team were either related to Karen or directly benefiting from made-up roles. She listed the number of fake violations issued in the past year, the amount collected in fines, and where those payments ended up. Everything was sourced, everything true. We distributed the flyers door to door, no drama, no confrontation, just left them under doormats and clipped to mailboxes with a friendly note. Next came the lawn signs. They were hilarious, professionally printed with phrases like HOA, helping oligarchs abuse, and smile, you're being fined for blinking. One had a cartoon of Karen's face on a gavel with the caption, obey or pay. These signs started popping up like mushrooms after a rainstorm. Within 3 days, at least 20 homes had one on their lawn. Karen sent out an urgent HOA bulletin threatening sanctions for signage, but no one took it seriously anymore. The community was shifting and fast. Then came the public hearing. A few residents, led by a retired lawyer named Mrs. Hillman, petitioned the city council to formally investigate the HOA's legitimacy. Enough signatures were collected to warrant a special session. Karen tried to block it, of course, claiming the council had no jurisdiction over internal community matters. That argument lasted about 8 seconds before the council president informed her that any organization collecting fees and issuing citations under the pretense of legal authority was absolutely within their jurisdiction. We arrived early. Karen arrived late. She brought a binder the size of a phone book and an air of smug desperation. She had even roped in one of the fake officers to stand behind her like a budget Secret Service agent. My wife wore jeans, boots, and a plain black t-shirt, no binder, no entourage, just one manila folder. When she stepped up to speak, she didn't rant or yell. She didn't accuse. She presented. She outlined the fake landscaping company, the non-existent upgrades, the shell account. She listed every weapon incident, every misuse of resident funds, and every HOA law that violated actual state housing statutes. She even played a recording of Karen threatening to personally evict anyone who brought shame to the community. That particular recording got a laugh from the crowd. Then came the best part. As she wrapped up, one of the city council members leaned forward and asked her a question, casual but clearly rehearsed. "Mrs. Owens," he said, "what exactly is your background?" There was a pause. My wife gave him a polite nod. "I am currently active in a classified capacity within the U.S. Army Tier 1 Special Mission Unit. My clearance level prohibits specifics, but I've served for over a decade, including in direct operational planning, intelligence coordination, and international threat assessment." The room went dead silent. Then, as if on cue, another council member, an older gentleman who had been quiet the whole time, sat up straighter and smiled. "I thought I recognized you," he said. "Welcome home, ma'am." Turns out he was retired Army, and suddenly Karen's credibility dissolved like sugar in hot tea. After the hearing, Karen didn't return to the clubhouse. Word spread fast. The HOA's books were being audited. All financial operations were frozen pending review. Residents were advised to stop paying dues until legal clarification could be issued. Several people demanded refunds for fines they now knew were baseless. Others began digging into their own violations. It was like the entire neighborhood woke up from a long nap and realized they'd been living in an HOA-themed reality show hosted by someone who didn't understand basic law, and just when it seemed like Karen might quietly retreat, the golf cart chase happened. We weren't even trying to provoke anything. My wife had gone for a walk, unarmed, in broad daylight, wearing a sweatshirt that said, "Love thy neighbor." She carried a tote bag full of audit copies for the residents who still hadn't heard. That's it. That's all she was doing. Karen, apparently unaware that federal injunctions are not optional, ordered one of her officers to retrieve the unauthorized materials. The man, our friend Captain Clipboard, jumped into the HOA cart and floored it. My wife, realizing what was happening, picked up her pace. He started yelling for her to stop, claiming he was performing a community seizure under Code Red protocol, which wasn't a thing until he said it out loud. She didn't run, just stepped off the sidewalk. What he didn't realize was that the sidewalk next to our house had a hidden trench, the kind landscapers dig and never fill in properly. He swerved the golf cart, hit the edge, tipped sideways, and landed square in the honeysuckle bushes. My wife didn't even flinch. She just walked over, reached into the passenger seat, and calmly retrieved her tote bag. Then she dropped a granola bar next to him and said, "In case you're in there a while." The footage, once again, went viral. After that, the HOA board formally disbanded. Several members resigned. Karen didn't show up to the next city council review. A federal compliance letter was posted publicly on the community bulletin board. It said the HOA was under full investigation and any enforcement activity under its name was to cease immediately. Karen vanished for a while after that. Rumor had it she went on a sabbatical. Someone claimed they saw her in a nearby town applying for a job at a real estate agency. I don't know if that's true. I just know that the fake siren stopped, the fines, and people started waving to each other again without fear of a violation slip for excessive neighborliness. As for my wife, she returned to her normal routine, morning jog, garden maintenance, and occasional meetings with very serious-looking people in very unmarked vehicles. She never talked about work, and I never asked. But once in a while, I'd catch her checking our porch camera feed with that same field focus I'd seen during the worst of it. Karen had tried to run our neighborhood like a dictatorship. My wife reminded her gently, professionally, and with a signature flourish that dictators don't survive long in places where people actually know how to fight back. And they certainly don't last when they mess with Delta Force. A month after the HOA officially disbanded, things finally started to feel like a neighborhood again. Kids were back on their bikes without being stalked by golf carts. Porch lights stayed on past 9 p.m. without threats of fines. People actually smiled when they passed each other on the sidewalk. It was as if a thick fog of paranoia had lifted, and in its place was the forgotten joy of suburban normalcy. My wife returned to her early morning runs, not because she needed the exercise, but because it was hers again, her street, her pace. No one watching with a clipboard or a GoPro. I started getting invited to neighborhood poker nights, and someone brought over fresh zucchini from their garden just because, civilization. Then, just as the dust was starting to settle, Karen made her grand return. Because, of course, she did. She pulled up in a borrowed minivan and stepped out like a politician making a campaign stop, sunglasses on, scarf blowing in the wind, clutching a leather-bound folder labeled Personal Legal Defense. She walked up to our porch without knocking, like nothing had ever happened, and set the folder gently on our welcome mat. I saw her from the window and raised an eyebrow. My wife didn't even look up from her tablet. She just said, "Leave it." She's trying to bait a reaction. The folder contained a letter written in dense legal language, full of deflections and self-praise. Karen wasn't apologizing, far from it. She was positioning herself as the victim of a conspiracy. According to her, the audit was fake, the HOA members were coerced, and my wife was part of a military intimidation campaign designed to topple neighborhood leadership. She cited obscure housing laws, misquoted a few court rulings, and requested mediation to avoid escalating to federal litigation. The irony was almost poetic. My wife took one look at the document and chuckled. She's still trying to play the long game. Too bad we already beat her at every turn. That afternoon, she forwarded the letter to the same federal office that issued the cease and desist order. We didn't need to do anything else. Karen had already buried herself under enough paperwork and fraud allegations to last several fiscal quarters. A week later, Karen showed up in court for her first hearing, representing herself. And that alone could have been the punchline. According to a neighbor who watched the live stream, she opened her defense with a slideshow that included clip art of gavels, the HOA logo she designed herself, and a poorly photoshopped image of my wife standing next to a tank. She claimed it was proof of paramilitary influence in local governance. The judge let her speak for all of 10 minutes before stopping her with a single question. Did you ever have the legal authority to fine or detain residents in your neighborhood? Karen tried to change the subject. The judge didn't let her. What followed was a public dismantling of everything Karen had built. The judge fined Karen $1,470, the exact amount she'd charged us. Poetic, sure. But watching her clutch that verdict? Priceless. On top of that, she was ordered to pay restitution and barred from serving in any residential leadership capacity for at least 10 years. Back home, life kept moving forward. My wife didn't celebrate. There was no victory dance or "I told you so," just another morning jog, another cup of green tea, another update to the perimeter sensors she quietly maintained out of habit. But the neighborhood celebrated for her. Someone threw a block party complete with burgers, cornhole, and a playlist that included multiple renditions of Another One Bites the Dust. Someone else gifted my wife a lawn sign that read, "Neighborhood Hero, 0 fines since 2024. It was corny, but she actually kept that one up. Weeks later, something unexpected arrived in the mail, a plain manila envelope with no return address, stamped with military clearance codes I hadn't seen before. Inside was a single certificate, an official commendation from the Department of Defense for exceptional conduct and civilian oversight in defense of constitutional rights. There was no ceremony, no medal, just the document and a handwritten note. "We're proud of how you handled it. See you soon." My wife stared at it for a long moment, then folded it and placed it in her secure file cabinet, the one she never let anyone touch. I asked her that night if she missed it, the action, the structure, the part of her that operated in the shadows while the rest of the world carried on with school runs and grocery lists. She didn't answer right away, just stared at the stars above our backyard, the wind gently rustling the trees she'd planted herself. Sometimes, she finally said, "But this matters too. Peace is the mission now." We thought that would be the end of it, but there was still one last twist. Late evening, just as we were cleaning up from a neighborhood cookout, a black SUV pulled up at the edge of the street, not tinted like a threat, clean, polished, unmarked, but official in its own quiet way. A man stepped out suited, haircut military precise. He greeted my wife by her first name. They didn't shake hands, just nodded at each other like two people who'd been through something and didn't need to say it out loud. He handed her a sealed envelope. She read it in silence, expression unreadable. Then she looked at me, and there was something in her eyes I hadn't seen in a while, a flicker of that old intensity, the one she wore before a deployment. Not fear, not even excitement, just certainty. She turned to the man and said, "When do I leave?" He replied, "Transport is ready at dawn. You'll be briefed en route." She nodded once, no hesitation, no goodbye. That night, she packed light, didn't tell me where she was going or how long she'd be gone. She just placed a note on my desk before bed. It said, "Karen was just the warm-up. This is mission." No signature, no details, just that. At sunrise, I watched her walk to the SUV, calm and steady, the way she always was. She didn't look back. I expected her to. She had a job to do somewhere in the world that still needed people like her. I stood on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the SUV disappear down the street, and smiled. The new HOA president, by the way, is Tom, retired postal worker, great guy. His first act was to remove all bylaws except for one: don't be a jerk.